Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your host, Brooke Walker, and How to Leave a Cult is a podcast on my experience being raised in a cult from the age of 8 till roughly 35 and what that was like. And it's pretty biographical from beginning to end. Currently, we're right around the age of 19 years old. When I had just gotten married and just had my first baby in an arranged marriage. The cult was a church that was started by Trina and Stephen Camp. It was called Church of the Immortal Consciousness. And it had a lot of things that cults have, everything from spiritual abuse to alcoholism, which is not something I think a lot of cults have across the board. But they also, it was led by the minister was a trance medium. And so she spoke a spirit through her, who was one of the teachings came from that spirit. And then her and her husband would implement those, and they would do workshops and different things at the time. And then it eventually grew into a church and a community that people were drawn to and began to move to, like my family was. So if you're new here, that is the backstory. Last episode, I talked about my birth with my son. I was 19 years old. I had just gotten married and I had just had a baby shower all within the same month. So today what we're going to talk about is expectations and things that began to happen after that as being a young married parent in the church and what that looked like. So, welcome. So, I talked about having my baby and a lot of the coming home and feeling very less than a woman because of the expectations that were put out there in the church about what you should and shouldn't be, you should be able to do as a woman having a baby. And looking back, I can tell that there was, people were recruited to the church for specific reasons. And my mom, I can see that one of the reasons she was recruited is because she was a midwife. So it was very important that they had somebody who could help deliver babies. And she wasn't the only one. And then my dad being an attorney, like I can see why they were both crucial roles that they wanted to have in the church because they brought a huge benefit. And then growing up in the church, we were fit into different things and the expectations of what we were supposed to do and the roles we had to play and the people we were married off to me, was all orchestrated for a bigger picture. And so we were told, okay, this is what you do and this is how you're supposed to do it within the incubator of it being under these rules that Duran and the ministers would put out. And Duran was the spirit that Trina tranced. So as a young couple in the church, one of the expectations was that we would regularly go to, and again, this was never written down. It was just, if you didn't, you would catch hell. And you would be like, oh God, shit, not going to do that again. So for example, like if you didn't show up to trance on a regular basis, and trance was pretty much every week, there was rarely that it got missed, that it didn't happen. But if you didn't show up to trance on a regular basis, then you would eventually be mentioned in trance in a very negative way. Like Duran would say something like, why is so-and-so avoiding me? Why doesn't so-and-so want to speak to me? Why haven't they showed up? And there was kind of a tab on people all the time. So you knew you had to show your face on a regular basis. Now, having just had a baby, there's a little bit of leeway. There would always be attempts for people to bring babies to trance, and you could bring babies to trance. And as long as the baby slept through it, most of them did, because you're just sitting in a dark, quiet room for the most part. But then, kind of after that you got out of that space, then it would be expected that somebody would watch the baby and you would come to some, and everybody would take turns between watching kids and going to trances. And then the other thing that you were expected to go to is processes. And those were very specific, and you would get called to those, and there was no excuse not to show up to those. If you had a baby, you would bring the baby. And the baby could be put down in one of the bedrooms, and you were expected, because those were very specific. They were of people of certain ages, or they could be couples of certain ages. So if you were supposed to be there, you better be there. Now, when we went to the trance was more like getting spiritual guidance from a higher power. But processes were all about having to go and to be, if there was incidents that happened with people that you were living with, because again, we all lived and commingled in different homes together. We were moved around on a regular basis. I could tell you roughly places that I lived, but people got moved so frequently. I can't tell you, like, you rarely lived anywhere for a year. You would just, and I think it was just an abuse tactic looking back. But at the time, it was just like, there was always things said about not getting too comfortable. Like, the idea of getting comfortable meant that you were not working towards God hard enough. So there was always this, don't get too comfortable. So when we had to go to the process, and which would be with a couple of the ministers or ministers in training, there was people that were expected to at some point become ministers, and sometimes they would do it. So if it was the younger people, we might have somebody who's a generation or two above us who was processing us. And so it could be everything from the things that you were discussing, issues going on in your relationship. If you had gotten into any kind of tiff with your significant other, and then that was seen by somebody, and you had not gone to work that out with a minister, then that would be something that had to be brought up. And somebody would call you out for everything. And that created this constant feeling of living on eggshells. And then there was the things in the teaching that had to be taught that we had to understand and make sure that we were implementing into our daily lives, in our relationships, so that we could be spiritual children and have spiritual in integrity relationships. So for us to be able to process our relationships in the teaching meant that we had to talk about out of integrities. We had to talk about our down and dirties. And so out of integrities would be anytime that you're having thoughts about somebody other than your significant other, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, especially when you're in a forced relationship like I was. And I had been so beaten down by that point. I mean, at the young age of 19, like, I had gotten myself to the point that it's like I was so sexually, what would the word be? It's like I was so sexually, like, cut off and stifled. I don't even remember feeling very sexual. I don't remember having a lot of attraction. I remember wanting to get dressed up sometime. I was very beautiful. I was young, but I don't remember having like a lot of desires that way. So I also, and we were in a very small group of people. So it was always like you had to express if you had out of integrities or any sexual thoughts about anybody else around, any of the other men or women in your generation or the other generations. And it was a horrible shit show. And it was cruel. And Then we also had to do what was called our petty down and dirties with each other, which meant that the people that were our significant other, we had to tell them. And they used to use this example. You need to get down and dirty. You need to tell them the truth because the truth is love. Now, it was the most cruel expressions that you've ever experienced in your entire life. And they labeled it as love. So I had a very fucked up understanding of what that meant because of this. And this is where it's like, I talked about implicit and explicit types of expressions, and it's like there's what you're being told, and then there's the underlying stuff that's going on underneath the surface, and they don't match up, but you keep being told that you're the problem. And because you keep hearing that you're the problem, you're on this constant anxiety of trying to figure out what's wrong with you. And you're on this personal witch hunt on fixing yourself and thinking that you can pray that away. And that if you work harder, because you're told all these things like you need to work harder, you need to do this, you need to do that, and all these spiritual gaslighting. And so you consistently are beating yourself up. So we're expressing the petty, down and dirty stuff. And the term that they used to use for that was basically saying things like, I hate the way you lick stamps, which was probably an example of somebody, but I don't know who it was because that was before me. So I hate the way you lick stamps was basically the example of like getting to the most petty and dirty and shitty thing you had to say about somebody, so that if you got all the negative out of the way, then that gave you something to build on. So we would be in these very young relationships, and then we would have to sit with our significant other, and we would have to tell them every petty thing that we did not like about them. And it could have been anything. The way they wore their hair, the way they chewed their food. And these were the things that were expressed and expected to be expressed. And if you didn't do it, then you would get broken down about how you don't tell the truth, which was specifically against the teaching. So there was no getting out of it. And the really unfortunate thing is that what we didn't do any of is we never were taught how to express love and appreciation and gratitude. And there was, things like hope, and it was very specifically said multiple times, hope is not in the teaching. So you're in this circle with groups of people, and it could be your generation and all the young couples that are of similar ages, and you're just like spewing venom. And then you're thrown, by the end of it, they would wrap it up with a bow in some way, which was superficial and not very helpful. And then you were sent home to try to work on that. And it just built up this hurt and this feeling of defeat and shame and anger and frustration. And so you spent all this time just like getting internal, but not in a good way, like in a very negative way. And then we were pitted against each other, and we would do some of the same stuff with each other in our relationships. So when we were living in a household, and we lived in a household with other couples, and sometimes we lived with my parents, and other times I lived with my sister and my brother in their relationships. And it was like we all had to work it out together. Whether we got along or not, we had to get along because we were considered spiritual sisters and brothers, and that superseded anything else. At the same time, there was declarations of things that were said at processes. So I remember during that time, and I could not tell you who specifically was in the room, but Stephen Camp was yelling at one of the processes at one time, by this point there's still some houses in the Mesa, Arizona area, but most of the houses are outside of Payson in a small area called Tonto Village. And probably by then owned maybe 15 to 20 homes in the area. And several of them were dedicated to the school. And they had been able to get grants over the years to be able to get stuff to help support the school and stuff as well. So we're living in a house. Now, Stephen at this particular process is yelling at all of the young people and saying, I want you guys to understand that all this that you see, none of this belongs to any of you. This is my kids' inheritance. This doesn't belong to any of you. This is what my kids are going to inherit down the road. And at the time, in my complete lack of financial knowledge, having never paid a bill, I mean, even as a mom with a kid, I still have no concept of any of this, right? All I've been told my whole life is to listen to what I'm told and to work. So he does this declaration about all the stuff that we don't own and that is never going to be ours. And I'm like, oh, and all I think, and again, like I look back at how dumb I was and I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, you can grow so much. Like I was so dumb at the time, and not because I'm a dumb person. I just was so in belief of everything we were doing. And I was like, well, of course why would I expect to have any of this? It's not like I haven't given my entire life and worked my entire ass off. And so has everybody in my family. Not to mention the fact that my parents have had a house that's been paid for and remortgaged to put more money back into the church. My parents had a paid for house that they mortgaged to put money back into the church. So why would I expect anything from it? And then, and my grandparents and there was a lot of people's grandparents who were giving money in different ways to their children. But the expectation was, I'm sure the parents thought this is something they're doing for their kids. But realistically, it was something that was being orchestrated and manipulated by the church too. So, my grandparents at the time, they gave money for different stuff. They'd throw their grandkids money for their birthdays, and they had put an offer out around the same time that they would pay for our college for their grandchildren. And this stings me to talk about, because knowing that I could have had my school paid for, and knowing that I didn't, and knowing that I didn't understand what an amazing gift that was, just stings. So at the time, I'm like, again, so into this church and this teaching and all this different stuff. So to me, it's like, why is that even important to me? Like, why would I want that? Why would I want to go to school? I'm only going to go to school if it has something to do with what Duran tells me and what the church tells me, and if it has something to do to give to this family, because that's all that matters to me. Like, Dumb. Dumb. And then they start sending stock too. So, and this was, 1998. And my grandfather was on the board of Enron. Little company you might have heard of. If you haven't, go look it up. And he had been on the board pretty much since they had started. He had a position that he got paid in stock. And so he would send us large chunks of stock to each of his grandkids. So this money comes in, and of course it's not like, oh, we're going to use the stock and then do this, this, and this, and invest it and do all these different things. No, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to immediately cash it out for purposes that will benefit our immediate well-being, which it was not about long-term goals. So we get the stock, and then we decide that we are going to put the money towards purchasing a house. And it will be a house that's in me and my siblings' names. And so this will be part of our inheritance, is a house we all have together in Tonto Village, Arizona. How exciting is that? Am I right? So we all cash it. Of course, we tithed. We had to tithe. It was 10 grand a piece, by the way. 10 grand a piece. So, and of course, we tithe on the full amount of it. And we didn't get the full amount. It had dropped a little bit when we tried to sell it. Then we purchased a house that we ended up moving into. And I don't remember who all moved into it. I know I moved into it. My parents moved into it. A bunch of us might have moved into it. I think my sister moved into it sometime around then too, because she was living somewhere else at the time. And so now we're all living in the home that is, even though my parents have a completely other house down in Mesa that they own, that they're paying for, that I think Steve and Marla might have been living in at the time. And my dad's paying the rent so that they can live there too. So Marla and Steve can live rent free, because I think Steve was like writing a book for Duran or some shit like that. So my parents went above and beyond in so many ways. The gaslighting was real. But that was the kind of stuff that happened at the time. And I'm jumping through hoops. Colin is working his tail off. He works for Walmart for a long time. And then eventually he begins to build up a bounty hunting business as well as process server, and actually builds a pretty decent little business in Payson for doing those things. And he started retrieving cars at one point too. So he's doing different stuff. And I think for him, it was kind of an escape as well. Even when he was working at Walmart, it was probably a little bit of escape because he had to travel for trainings and stuff. So he'd leave for a couple days. And so he'd be gone on weekends sometimes, and he'd be, off for this and that. And me and his relationship was dysfunctional and very sad. It was a very young relationship that we were expected to do all the things that I just explained to you. So what that ended up bringing about with us is that, there was not a lot of love. There was a lot of conflict. And I mean, I think there was some love in the fact that we had kids together. I think there was maybe a little bit of respect, but this breaking down of each other and the expectations of what we were expected to do in the church all the time made the possibility of a relationship with us absolutely impossible. And My dad helped Colin a lot in helping his business. I think my dad fathered Colin in a lot of ways. That was really beneficial. But when it came to me and him, we just fought. We fought all the time. There was rarely a time we weren't fighting. And sometimes we were fighting over his drinking, and sometimes we were fighting over his not going to trance enough or not being able to go to processes. And there was all this like expectation about how you were supposed to do that. And that was a priority over everything else. It didn't matter if you had a job. It didn't matter if you needed to make money. That was very secondary to any of it. So your spirituality was first. And if your relationship and your spirituality were not doing well, then the expectation is you need to put everything aside to make that better. And so we just were at each other's throats most of the time. And then when we weren't fighting, it was Arctic between us. It was very cold, like moments of like barely speaking to each other. I mean, there was nights he wouldn't make it home for dinner. And, so I just focused on the things I had to do, which was taking care of my baby and babysitting all the other babies I was watching at the time, and doing whatever else was expected of me that I was told to do, cleaning, cooking, and all of that. So, I want to talk today. That's kind of wrap up the story today. Next week, we'll kind of dive into, I got pregnant. So I got pregnant very shortly after having my son. So Irish twins over here. So my son was born in 98. My daughter was born in 99. And they are 15 whole months apart. So shortly after he was born, I was pregnant again. So I went straight into what to do there. And I'm going to talk about her birth and kind of what began to happen after I had her. So we'll talk about that next episode. I want to talk today. So I was talking about like the things we didn't learn. We didn't learn how to express love and gratitude. And I talked about like finding gifts and things. We are able to learn and we are able to change. And if you're not happy with where you're at, then all you need to do is change something and you'll be somewhere different. And I had to learn how to practice gratitude. And I was really getting out of the cult. I was like, woo-woo bullshit can fuck off for the rest of my life. I don't believe in woo-woo bullshit. We don't do woo-woo bullshit. I've been gaslit long enough. None of that's going to happen in my life. But then I began to find all these places where science and research had been done on all this stuff and how beneficial it is, like the way that it changes your brain. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today because I hope that you will do some woo-woo bullshit called practicing gratitude. And I think that if you practice gratitude, see, the fun thing about this is you get to try it out and you get to see how it helps you. And you get to say, wow, that actually works, but I'm going to tell you the science behind it so that you'll actually want to go try it out. And then you can come back and you can say, yeah, that actually was amazing. And that was really helpful. And that changed my life. Gratitude changed my life. I didn't get into the practice of gratitude until I was about 40 years old. There was other things I had implemented that were really beneficial, like meditation. But gratitude was not one that I had practiced. I thought it was not something that I didn't really get what it was. And so let's explain what gratitude is. Gratitude is acknowledging the things that you have in your life and seeing and acknowledging the value they hold for you. Like understanding that they are something that deserves appreciation. Okay? And it could be the big things and it could be the little things. And the first time I practiced gratitude started on my 40th birthday, and I decided I was going to do 40 days of gratitude. And I posted them all on Facebook. And every one of them had to be different. So it was 40 different things. Now, I think any of you could find 5 to 10 things right now that you could be grateful for. I want to challenge you, if you're going to do this, to find different things. Make sure they're not the same every day. And I'm going to talk to you about how, but let's talk a little bit about why. So let's talk about gratitude in the brain. So gratitude in the brain wires and fires new neural connections to the bliss centers. So this means that it's actually reconnecting neural pathways. And when you do this, this actually changes the way the brain works, meaning that you're more likely to go to the positive pathways than the negative pathways the more that you practice it. So this is one of those things, the more you do it, the better you get. It enhances your dopamine and serotonin. So these are the neurotransmitters for happiness. So instead of doing other things to bring joy into your life, just acknowledging and finding gratitude in the things you already have can help to grow your happiness. It reduces fear and anxiety and helps to regulate the stress hormones. So a lot of us think of fear and anxiety as being something that we have all the time. When you practice gratitude, that begins to lessen. It fosters cognitive restructuring and helps to build positive thinking. And that kind of goes back into the neural connections. So think about something that builds more positive thinking. I used to think there was no reason that anybody should ever be a positive person. I was a pessimist. I thought that's the way everybody should be, because why would you want to be positive about things? Shit could hit the fan at any time. Boy, was I wrong. Being a positive person is so much more fun. Because when you do it and you expect good things come. If you expect shit, you're probably going to get some shit. But when you expect good, you create more in that in your life. And I'll go into that in another episode about how we actually attract the things that we focus on. Other benefits of gratitude. It improves sleep. It lowers blood pressure. People who do gratitude exercise more. It boosts your immune system. This one's fascinating. So you can boost, there's been studies on this, and this particular one came from Dr. Joe Dispenza, but you can boost your immune system as much as 50% by practicing gratitude for 15 minutes a day, 3 times a day. I know that's a long time, but think about that. Boost your immune system by 50%. Think about doing that, especially with the winter season coming. It increases your pain tolerance. So they found that people who practiced gratitude when they were going through painful physical things, that they had less pain when they practiced gratitude. It helps patients who are going through heart illness. And this was a 7% increase. So these are patients that have some kind of contributing factor towards having some kind of heart disease and heart illness. And gratitude increased their biomarkers by 7% positively. So, how do we practice gratitude? First off, decide how many days you're going to practice. Today, and I would recommend you do longer than a week. You could see the benefits in as little as a week, but go for it. Give it 30 days. Give it 30 imperfect, best you can days, which means if you miss one, you just start again the next day. So maybe you don't hit 30, or maybe you do 30 and you just, it takes you 35 days to get it done. So do 30 days. And each of those, I want you to give yourself minimum of 2. You don't need to necessarily do more than 5, but sit and write them down. And here's what I do to start. This is the prompt that I do, which is, I am so incredibly grateful. And just thinking about that actually calms me, because I'm so used to that being a prompt that gets me into this really amazing feeling. Because it almost makes me want to tear up, because the things that I'm grateful for, like, they mean so much to me. But the funny thing is, when I started this, I didn't have that. Like, I remember when I started practicing gratitude, and I remember starting to look around at the things I had in my life, and I was like, well, yeah, I have all this, but why should I be thankful for it? I still have this problem, and I still have that problem. Like, it was, the woman you see before you is not the same person. So let me be very clear about that. Before I started practicing gratitude, even though I had a million blessings in my life, I was not actively trying to see them. And practicing gratitude helps you to understand that what you have in your life is a gift and a blessing, and it deserves value and appreciation. And that is the people that you have, that is your health, that is having the power on, and all kinds of wonderful things. So practice it. I promise you, your health will appreciate you. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. As always, please like, follow, and share. And I would love if you could give me a review, because that's what helps get this around. So have another amazing day. Bye-bye.